How we doing, guys? Welcome back to the Gaelic Gridiron podcast. We have a bit of a college football special for you on this episode, and joining me from the College Football Network and the College Chaps podcast, it's Mr. Oliver Hodgkinson. Oliver, welcome.
Thanks for having me, man. Really looking forward to talking some college football. It was great to catch up with you over in Dublin when the Fighting Irish and Navy were over. I'm just representing Navy tonight, so yeah, it was great to catch up with you. I enjoyed talking to you. I'm looking forward to chatting some more ball this Wednesday evening as we're talking now.
Spotted the Navy teacher when you jumped online, and I bit my tongue. I'm not going to say anything. You were put in your place in the Aviva Stadium, so I think enough was said on the pitch. But yeah, look, it's been a mental first couple of weeks in the college football season. Some really surprising results, some results that haven't been as surprising. Um, let's start by talking about Alabama and Texas, because that kind of came out of nowhere a little bit, didn't it?
It's an interesting one because obviously Alabama came into the game ranked third overall. Texas were 11th overall in the AP poll, and historically that's a game where you look at and you'd say Alabama is a favourite. Texas has had a couple of seasons where they've been not up to their standards. Certainly within the Big 12, there's certainly from a national perspective, it's been a while since they've been really nationally relevant. But I think you look coming into this season, rewind into the preseason. For me, I think there were a lot of questions over this Alabama team. I think when you looked at the landscape of college football for Texas, a great roster, a great opportunity to do something special this season. And obviously they played Alabama close last year. They were a Quinn Ewers injury away from doing Alabama last year. So I kind of feel like going into this game, those two teams were from a national perspective viewed maybe the wrong way around. Certainly in the power rankings that we write at College Football Network, certainly from my own personal opinion, I kind of felt like Texas, to me, although it was in Tuscaloosa, although Nick Saban and Alabama are this behemoth of college football that you can never write off, I always felt that Texas had a really good chance of pulling out a great result. And the game was closer than the scoreline suggested, let's be honest.
Yeah.
Texas pulled away in the fourth quarter, but they really flexed their muscle of what they can be this season across the board, whether that be the performance of Quinn Ewers, whether it's those wide receivers, Xavier Worthy, A.D. Mitchell. There's a whole heap of talent in that wide receiver room. The running back, they managed to get the ground game going, and the offensive line was superb, and then the defense was so ferocious. And you look at a guy like Anthony Hill Jr., a true freshman, showing up on the national stage in Tuscaloosa. He was incredible, but the whole Texas defense was ferocious. And I think Steve Sarkisian said after the game, look, they knew they needed to come out and be aggressive. That's exactly what they were, and it puts them in a great situation going forward, Texas, where there's now more questions about what Alabama can be, where they end up by the end of this season.
How key has the development of Quinn Ewers been to the success of Texas? And they're currently ranked fourth. Like, do you see him having kind of finally grown into the player that he was promised to be when he came out of high school and went to Ohio State first? Do you see something special in him?
There's certainly something special in it. I thought, what for me, and don't get me wrong, it was a great performance by Quinn Ewers. There were some bits and pieces that you'd like to see cleaned up. It wasn't a consummate performance of quarterbacking by any stretch of the imagination. But what I thought was really impressive was how he was cool, calm, collective, controlled in that environment, with that expectation, with that weight of pressure that, a lot of people talking about Texas, the final year in the Big 12. This is their opportunity to go out on a high from the Big 12. So there's that level of expectation there. And I thought he did a great job of being calm and controlled in that moment. I think it was great seeing something Steve Sarkisian touched on again after the game was some of the best plays that you saw from Texas on Saturday night was Quinn Ewers realizing and recognizing, coverages and motions and shifts from the Alabama defense, and being able to recognize that and say, look, we can do this, we can take advantage of this, this, and this. And I think from a young quarterback perspective, who, like you say, this is a kid who came out of high school with such high expectations, and he spent that year at Ohio State, and then he came to Texas. He was injured last year. I think you'll see as down the stretch of the season, he's really going to develop into a really high caliber college football quarterback and ultimately NFL draft prospect.
How significant was the fact that this defeat came in Bryant-Denny Stadium in Tuscaloosa, a hostile environment, and that must be a massive boost of morale for Texas this early in the season. And it sees them currently ranked fourth, which is the highest I can remember them being ranked in recent memory anyway.
Yeah, it's huge coming to a place like Bryant-Denny Stadium in Tuscaloosa. Again, Steve Sarkisian touched on it. Like he's been there at Alabama. He's seen teams come to that stadium and rock up already demoralized before the game's even kicked off. So for Texas to come to that stadium, stand firm, play as well as they did, get the result that they did. It's for nothing that this game had been circled, I think, for a lot of Texas fans, college football analysts, media. This game has been circled, a week 2 game. There's a whole stretch of the season to go, but this game is circled for a reason on the Texas schedule, because it is and was undoubtedly the toughest test, the biggest game with the brightest spotlight, and they passed that test with flying colours. And now you look at the schedule down the rest of the road for Texas, there probably isn't a game as hard as that Alabama game, and you're only going to grow. Injuries aside, anything could happen. We've seen Aaron Rodgers for the New York Jets on Monday night. Anything can happen from an injury perspective, but it feels like it's all set up for Texas to grow into this season now and really live up to the potential of that roster.
Where does this leave Alabama, though? I mean, they used to be the most feared team in the country, the giants of the SEC. To me, it seems like they've fallen off a little bit. I mean, they didn't make the the college football playoff last year. From this vantage point, they're unlikely to make the college football playoff again this year. So there's no way they beat Georgia in the SEC championship game. So, where does Nick Saban and his once vaunted Alabama go from here?
Yeah, it's interesting because they've now got their entire SEC schedule ahead of them. They could legitimately get to the SEC championship game. I'm not super high on what Georgia are doing and can be down the stretch of the season, so I don't think it's necessarily the walkover that people think it might be. So there is still a chance for Alabama. It is difficult, obviously, with one loss on your resume. But if they win the SEC the SEC championship, we've seen historically the SEC champion as a shoe-in for the Final Four. So it is still possible. I think for Alabama, there's still lots of questions. Jalen Milroe is a passing quarterback. Who is he? How good is he? What can he be?
Yeah.
And that question still, it was coming into the season, but they were so late making that announcement of who would be the starting quarterback at Alabama, which is so unlike what we've become used to. We've seen Mac Jones, Bryce Young, Tua, that hierarchy, that preparation for the next guy to come along. And it just hasn't been that way for the Alabama quarterback situation this year. And then you've got the offensive line isn't as quite strong as some Alabama offensive lines we've seen in recent years. So there's lots of question marks there about this team. But again, it comes back to you can never really rule out a Nick Saban team until they're over and out and done. And we'll see how they progress in SEC play, because the SEC teams haven't looked like they're blowing the doors off opposition. LSU obviously spanked by FSU on the opening day. Georgia haven't been super impressive in either of their games. There's lots of question marks over the SEC conference as a whole. So it's going to be really interesting to see. I don't think you can ever rule Alabama out, but it certainly feels like, and coming into the season, I think it felt like it as well, that this was going to be a special college football season because there's so many unknowns for so many teams that traditionally have been a known quantity coming into the year. So there was It's super exciting. It's played out that way through 2 weeks. I think it's going to play out that way down the stretch of the season as well. And I think anything really legitimately could happen over the next 10 to 12 weeks.
Speaking of anything could legitimately happen, and another trending program in the world of college football, it's the Colorado Buffaloes. I mean, what the hell is going on in Boulder with Deion Sanders? Is there something magic in the water? Because they've come out of nowhere. They bet TCU in a massive upset in week one in Texas, and then sold out their stadium for their first home game and defeated Nebraska. And they looked like legitimate national championship contenders under Deion Sanders.
It's there's a lot of analysts having to eat humble pie and eat their words, and well, I'm one of them because I don't think anyone could have predicted the immediate success that Colorado have seen. You bring in so much of football is finding cohesion and gelling a team together and finding consistency, and that's why you talk about, when you do preseason reviews, you talk about, is the quarterback coming back? How many of the offensive line are coming back? How good was the offensive line that they bring back from the previous year, and building that cohesion? And so when you look at Colorado with a team of 80 plus new faces, there's like legitimate questions how that whole thing would work out. And it's working out pretty well so far for those guys. And you can't rule out the Deion effect. Obviously, I think if it wasn't Deion Sanders who was the head coach, because there's a lot of programs who had a lot of roster turnover. You look at Jay Norvell at Colorado State. He brought in a whole new team to that program. And FSU are doing huge things in the transfer portal. Ole Miss are doing huge things in the transfer portal. Well, they don't create that national buzz and attention that Deion Sanders has brought to Colorado. And part of that's how Deion is, how he's been with the media from the get-go, how he's been with the players at Colorado, with the fans at Colorado from the get-go. But to see that product...
It's the primetime effect.
It is. It very much is. But to see the on-field performance against TCU... Now, I wasn't super high on TCU, and they said in the game broadcast, national championship runner-up TCU. This isn't that team that went to the national championship last year by any stretch of the imagination. Lots of missing pieces. So I feel like TCU were kind of a little overrated going into the game, but that doesn't take anything away from, Colorado are a team that ranked pretty much rock bottom in nearly every single statistical metric. And then we watched the product on the field last year, and it was god-awful to watch. But, it's awesome to watch. It's been successful so far. You mentioned the Nebraska game there. Another program with high expectations with a new coach in Matt Rule. Curb stomped by Colorado. They're going to have national cameras, college game days there for the game against Colorado State. Like this unprecedented attention, great skill players on both sides of the ball. We're talking about Travis Hunter and Shedeur Sanders as legitimate Heisman contenders. Like, this is awesome if you're a Colorado Buffaloes fan. Is it sustainable down the whole stretch of the season? Who knows? Because no one expected it to be this good to start with, so no one knows whether they can sustain it when injuries start kicking in. If a defeat comes in, how is that locker room going to react? There's a lot of unknowns like down the stretch of the season, but they're nationally ranked now for a reason, and I think they deserve that national ranking for sure. It's super exciting to watch it all play out.
You talked there about Shedeur Sanders, of course, Coach Deion Sanders' son, a quarterback, but also Travis Hunter, probably one of the most talented college football players in America right now, playing both sides of the ball. He's a starting wide receiver and a starting cornerback. I mean, that's just unheard of. I think he played something like 88% of all possible snaps against Nebraska, which is just insane. So, like, is that sustainable? And God forbid if they do lose him to injury, does that put a damper on their season?
Is it sustainable? Is probably no. The answer to that is no. I don't. He's clearly an ultra fit athlete, and we were talking about this. I don't know if it was on Twitter or in a group chat, and someone was saying about going for a beer on a Friday. I don't think Travis Hunter's going for a beer on a Friday night. He's not Johnny Manziel by any stretch of the imagination. so he's not obliterating his body off the field as well as on it. But that you can't even begin to imagine the toll that takes on you playing 120. I think it was 129 snaps they played on across both sides of the ball in that season opener.
Absolutely nuts. Like for as fit as an athlete as he might be, that's not like just running around. That's putting serious stress on your body and all the hits, especially playing the physical position of cornerback as well.
Yeah, exactly. And the thing is, I think you saw in that opening game, there was a little bit of fatigue with him that started creeping in at times. So you can't look at that one game. That's not sustainable down the stretch. So the question then for Travis Hunter is, where is he best utilised? And I think for Colorado, it's certainly at the cornerback position because they have got so much offensive talent. We saw in the Nebraska game, guys like Xavier Weaver come to the fore. But they have got so many different high-quality wide receivers. They've got great running backs who can handle a workload. They've got great running backs who can handle a receiving workload out of the backfield as well. So I don't think he's as much needed in the offense as he is on the defense, which gives him a great opportunity to then go and be a defensive contender for the Heisman because Heisman voters have already seen what he can do offensively. He already had more. He's already had more receptions in 2 games than Charles Woodson had the entire season when he won the Heisman as a cornerback for Michigan. So that's there. That element of playmaking ability that helped Charles Woodson win the Heisman is, we know that Travis Hunter has that. So now go out and show that for a whole season you can be a dominant cornerback. Maybe return a punt or two. And that's it. That's all he needs, I think, to be a legitimate defensive contender for the Heisman.
And with all the colleges that are jumping off out of the Pac-12 like rats from a sinking ship, what happens? What becomes of the Buffalo now, or the Buffaloes next season? Do you foresee the Pac-12 completely folding as a conference and the remaining 4 teams, I think, is scattering to other divisions or other conferences, or what's your kind of take on that?
Yeah, so obviously the Colorado jumped ship with Arizona State to the Big 12. So the Big 12, we talked about on our podcast last night. The Big 12 have kind of been very proactive in making sure they stayed alive in this whole realignment shuffle. And obviously the Big 10 have done a good job of that as well. The ACC and the SEC, a little bit slow off the mark, but the SEC, and obviously they've got Texas and Oklahoma. They kicked this whole realignment cycle off, and they're happy with the teams that they've got. Which just leaves Oregon State and Washington State with the Pac-12, which is turning really nasty in terms of what the outlook looks like. They've already taken the Pac-12 to court to stop basically the Pac-12 disbanding and the assets being distributed between the teams that are leaving. So a lot of teams, Washington, Oregon, USC, UCLA, I think they looked at this as the Pac-12 disbanding would be their divorce, breakup, payout that they would then use to fund however many seasons in the new conference. Because you look at several of the teams that have left the Pac-12 for new climbs aren't going to get a share of the TV money. You look at SMU. SMU aren't going to get anything from the ACC for it's into 2030s. So I think a number of the Pac-12 teams that have been moved out or have chosen to move on to new conferences thought, well, the Pac-12 is going to disband. We're going to use that money to help offset those losses. Well, Oregon State and Washington State, rightly so, they're like, right, well, we're not going to just allow you guys to up ship, leave us stranded, because that's exactly what they are right now. They're stranded in no man's land. So they're fighting for their lives, which is, Oregon State's a great football program this year. Washington State's got off to a great start as well with Cam Ward at quarterback. He doesn't get the national recognition. That's kind of part and parcel of playing it. What is 4 o'clock in the morning, 5 o'clock in the morning for us? Midnight, 1 o'clock a.m. On the East Coast. A lot of those players, a lot of those teams do get overlooked. So, but for the Buffaloes, I think if they can maintain with Dion there, bringing in, the recruiting cycle this time around is going to be huge. He's shown already he can bring in big name recruits as well as bringing those guys with him from the transfer portal. I think the Buffs are set up for a sustained success if they just keep Coach Prime at the helm.
Do they shock the nation and get a college football playoff spot?
I think that's difficult, and there's multiple reasons why it's difficult. The Pac-12 hasn't had a representative in the college football playoff for years. Washington were the last team to represent the Pac-12. But the nature of that conference is so cannibalistic. It used to be the joke, right? It'd be like USC would lose to a Colorado on a Friday night, and that'd scupper their chances of the college football playoff. Well, Colorado isn't that joke team anymore. But all these teams are going to take games off each other because the Pac-12, as daft as it sounds for a conference which is dying and is essentially dead, so much talent in that conference. USC are a great team, Washington are a great team, Oregon, Utah, two-time Pac-12 champions, a great team, having some struggles without quarterback Cam Rising, but they're still 2-0. They've still got win over Florida on their record as whatever that counts, with Florida being the program they are right now. But there's so many great teams. So I think that's the biggest stumbling block to Colorado getting anywhere near the college football playoff is they're going to have to overcome one of those teams. And that's a very different proposition to, beating up on a TCU or a Nebraska when you start talking about the quality that USC, Washington, Oregon, and Utah all possess.
As a Notre Dame fan, I need to get your opinion on if they are legit and can they win the big games, because in the past, that's what scuppered them is they couldn't win the big games. They fell to Ohio State last year. They lost to Georgia at home a couple of years ago. And the two biggest games on Notre Dame's schedule this year are Ohio State at home and USC at home. So from your point of view, do you see Notre Dame overcoming those challenges and somehow getting back to the playoffs?
I don't think there's a better time to play Ohio State than this season. How many times, as a Notre Dame fan, can you remember a time when you play Ohio State and Notre Dame has a quarterback and Ohio State has a lot of question marks at the quarterback position? Because, I don't remember it any time recently, but, the Fighting Irish have got a guy in Sam Hartman. Ohio State have got a lot of question marks about Kyle McCord. And our offensive line, again, Notre Dame's offensive line, we saw it in Dublin. We've seen it since in East Tennessee State's not a great example, but NC State, first real, what you would call competitive game, a Power 5 program, they look great. Even after that severe weather delay, they look great. That offensive line is awesome with Blake Fisher and Joe Alt and the guys on the interior who there was a lot of questions about. They've looked great as well. Audric Estime is one of the most terrifying running backs in college football. So
he's a big man. Like, if you ever stood beside him, he's not particularly tall. He's only about, I'd say he's only scratching 6 feet tall, but he is just, and like, I met him back in May and he's gotten bigger since. Like, it's insane.
The thing is, as well, like you say, he's a very stocky built running back, but he's got some sneaky athleticism. You saw that 80-yard touchdown run to open the second quarter against NC State was awesome. So from that game perspective against Ohio State, there's a lot of ticks in the Notre Dame box. I think that's probably they've probably got the best chance of winning that game that they've had recently. Then USC's an unknown because obviously Caleb Williams is incredible. Notre Dame, I was so impressed with the Notre Dame defense in Dublin, from front to back. The cornerback duo of Benjamin Morrison and Cam Hart everyone knew they were great coming into that game, but there was a lot of questions about the defensive front. Well, they were awesome. They were flying to the ball. Linebackers were incredible. So I think the Notre Dame defense can certainly go toe-to-toe with the USC offense, which is going to be the struggle for every team that faces USC this year, trying to contain Caleb Williams, that like 20 deep 5-star wide receiver room that they've got. The question with USC is how good is that defense, or how much better than last year is that defense going to be when they face a stern test? Because they've looked better this year so far. Offensively, they're murdering people left, right, and center. The defense, I don't really feel like has had a real test. San Jose State in week 0 was probably the biggest test that they've had, because the Nevada weren't great. Stanford, they're still, building first-year head coach and first-year FBS head coach in Tory Taylor. He's bringing his own thing to Stanford. That's going to take some time. So I don't really see Stanford as being a test of that defense either. So time will tell whether that USC defense really is better this year once they face some serious competition, because that's the only thing holding that program back, because there's not a lot holding Caleb Williams back.
So as it stands right now, going into week 3, the rankings are top 4: Georgia, Michigan, Florida State, and Texas. How much do you see that changing between now and when the first set of college football playoff rankings are released in kind of December time?
It's going to be interesting because Georgia they started obviously as the national championship. They started as everyone's preseason number 1. They've won both their games, so we've seen previously the AP poll and the college football playoff rankings as well. They're not prone to dropping a team if they win a game, unless the teams around them do something really magical. It's going to take a lot for Georgia to drop down there. So Georgia's SEC schedule isn't really that hard. So Georgia could legitimately go into the first set of college football playoff rankings as the number 1 ranked team. I don't think they're the best team in the country right now by a long shot, honestly. But all they've got to do really is keep winning, and they'll hang on to that 1 spot. Michigan have looked good. They've looked, not great tests, ECU and UNLV, but they've looked good. They've been strong on defense, and again, that's another program with a defense that's loaded front to back. And then JJ McCarthy's look like the real deal. Their offensive line is always incredible. Blake Corum and Donovan Edwards as a running back duo are just insane. So Michigan really kind of, their tests to Penn State and Ohio State in the Big Ten. And they don't get Ohio State until later on in the year, so they could legitimately be at 2. I think FSU is the best team in the country, and they've really the LSU game was the I think the major test. They've got Clemson. I think they can easily roll Clemson because that's a program that's really
in trouble, big trouble down there in South Carolina. I think you saw Dabo's face after that drop to Duke in week 1. That man was shell-shocked. He had no idea what just hit him. And I think the Duke game was going to be a trap game for Notre Dame as well in the ACC, now that we're talking about Duke.
Duke are a really good football team, man. And this was one of the things coming into that game. You mentioned Dabo being shell-shocked. I don't know how you could be shell-shocked as a head coach in the ACC that Duke came out and played the way they did, because the writing was on the wall last year when you look at that program. Great quarterback in Riley Leonard. Graham Barton at left tackle, one of the best left tackles in the country. Mike Elko's got that defense. Like we mentioned Notre Dame's defense, Mike Elko's got that Duke defense absolutely flying to the ball. And they might not have headline household names, but guys like Dwayne Carter, Jamian Franklin, Jalen Stinson, there's a whole host of talent, again, front to back. So I think Duke are probably the 3rd best team in the ACC as you look at it right now, between FSU and North Carolina. So in the preseason, you'd say that Clemson game was the marquee game for SSU. You'd be shocked if Clemson beat FSU. And don't get me wrong, it's easy to beat up on Dabo and it's easy to beat up on Clemson. They'll find something. They'll not be completely beat down forever, but they've got to do something, because Cade Klubnik, everyone beat up on DJ Uiagalelei before he left for Oregon State. Cade Klubnik was the guy who was going to come in. I've not seen anything from Cade Klubnik in the games he played last year, the spring game. I watched Clemson's spring game, and there's a lot of high, wide, and handsome stuff from Cade Klubnik, and you saw that again in the Duke game. They struggled early on against Charleston Southern, That's you've got to.
That says it all, really. That Clemson's dominance is in the rearview mirror, really, in the ACC and nationally.
Yeah, I think so. I think so for sure. I think and FSU are back to being a nationally relevant program for the first time in years, and that's a testament to what Mike Norvell's done with that program. We mentioned the Dion effect. Mike Norvell has mined the transfer portal as well as anyone else you can think of in college football. When you look at that roster, Keon Coleman from Michigan State, who absolutely went off in that LSU game. Jared Verse is probably the best defensive player in college football right now. Transfer portal. Braden Fisk, he got out of Western Michigan this last time around. Fentrell Cypress at cornerback, another guy they picked up out of the put from the ACC, from Virginia. Mike Norvell is doing such a great job of building that program through the transfer portal. It's taken him a minute. It doesn't seem like a minute ago since people were kind of putting pressure on Mike Norvell and calling for his job, but he's done such a great job, and it shows what can be done with patience, which isn't always easy to come by, especially in a state like Florida. Look at the Florida Gators, and they were already calling for Billy Napier's head when he was the savior. Like, he was going to be the savior a year ago, and he's already calling for his head because the expectation's so high and the patience just isn't there. But yeah, I think FSU are legit for sure. So I don't see them dropping out of the top four. And then Texas, we mentioned before, the hardest game on their schedule is behind them, and there'll be some difficult games. Like Kansas State is always a tough team to play. So there'll be some difficult games for Texas, but with that Alabama win behind them, I think that the only way that top four changes in the eyes of the people who have put that top four together is like if USC roll a Notre Dame, if they roll an Ohio State, that would probably sneak USC into that top four. But we'll see how that plays out. And it's super exciting, intriguing to see what's going to happen with that top four, because there's a legitimate good number of teams who can make a case that they deserve to be in the top four. Like Washington, for example, talk about the Pac-12. Washington's a great team. I'm very high on Washington. But right now they're going to be on the outside looking in, even if they win out.
So this is likely going to go out on Saturday morning, just before week 3 gets underway, and you'll be in the middle of another college football marathon. And I look forward to keeping track of the scores via your tweets. But what matchup coming up intrigues you the most this weekend?
It's funny because I won't name the national college football journalist who called college football week 3 a dud, which to me was hilarious because I think there's so many great matchups this week. There might not be some the matchups that define the top 4, for example. But there's so many great games. LSU Mississippi State, I think, is an important game in the SEC. That's a noon kickoff Eastern time, 5:00 UK time. I think it's a really important game to see how Brian Kelly's LSU team bounce back from that defeat to FSU when they have to play a Power 5 program, and that's the start of the SEC campaign for them. That's the start of their march back towards defending the SEC West. So I think it's a really important game. I'm looking forward to watching Georgia Tech at Ole Miss. Georgia Tech have got off to, they're 1-1, but they could be 2-0. They looked great early on against Louisville before they fell off in week 1. They looked great last week, beating up on HBCU team SC State. So I think that's a great game. BYU Arkansas was a great game last year. I think that's got lots of potential this time around. TCU Houston, two teams with kind of different pressures for different reasons. Houston coming off a loss to Rice, lots of pressure on head coach Dana Holgerson there. I could go on, man. I actually think there's so many great. So a game that no one is talking about because it features 2 group of 5 teams, but these are 2 contenders for their own conference. Is San Jose State and Toledo. Toledo reigning MAC champions. San Jose State have got a great chance, I think, in the Mountain West. 2 great high-powered offenses, 2 great quarterbacks who are capable of producing magic at the drop of the hat. It's like, I can't even remember what time the kickoff is off the top of my head, but it's a game that I'm going to have an eye on. Fresno State, Arizona State, if you really want to stay up till 3:30 a.m., I think that game kicks off.
That 5 p.m. kickoff between LSU and Mississippi State sounds like it could be the one that I'll start off my viewing with. Listen, Oliver, look, absolutely fantastic talking college football with you. Really enjoyed getting your take on what's been happening so far. And listen, we'll definitely catch up at some point during the season to talk more college football. Once we get towards the winter and the college football playoff starts to take a bit of shape as well.
Yes, I really appreciate you having me on. Really enjoyed it.
Go on, take care of yourself.